We'll be sending out that recording along with the slides and also frequently asked questions. So we'll be sending that out after the event's finished. And if anybody's got any technical problems, just let us know, send an email or a text directly to Sam or myself, and we will try and sort that out for you during the session. And if not, you will get that recorded session afterwards. So Helen is our main presenter today. She's giving an introduction to fundraising. She's got 20 years experience, both within organisations and as a consultant in fundraising. She's a full member of the Institute of Fundraising and has declared a passion for mentoring and training. So I think we're in good hands this morning. Throughout, Sam and myself will be on hand to give the technical finance bits. And Sam will also give you some information on our project before we close the session. We also have an exciting development on the technology front, which Sam will tell you about at the end as well. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Helen, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you, Debbie. Good morning, everybody. As Debbie said, my name's Helen Mulhern. I've been fundraising now for over 20 years. Particularly around the trusts area. So I'm really pleased to be here sharing some information with you today. Just as a very quick overview, we're going to be covering a background or an overview of trusts, what they are, how they award funds, some checklists of documents, the documents that I'd recommend you have in place before you even get to the point of making an application, with a particular focus on accounts, the accounting documents that you need in place. So that's what we're going to be covering today, just to make sure everyone's in the right place and knows what we're going to be talking about. So to start, so what are trusts? Basically, they're set up as either a way for a family or a company to give funds to a non-profit organisation. They're registered with the Charity Commission. They have clear criteria and objectives in terms of what they want to achieve. And they tend to award, not always, but they tend to award restricted funding, although this is starting to change, which is a very good thing for charities, in my opinion. They award the profits of their investments mainly, normally about quarterly, so every 3 or 4 months. So there is a long lead-in time to trusts. And they will part fund something or completely fund something, and often like to complete the funding. Some don't accept unsolicited applications. They want to fund organisations they've identified themselves. And in most cases, you can't reapply for about 12 months. That's whether you've been successful or not. In terms of what types of funding they offer, they will fund core or running costs, new projects or services, which was the norm for a long time. Trusts like to fund new and exciting things, although in the current climate, they are coming back and supporting core costs. They will often support capital appeals, so the purchase of new buildings, building of buildings, and also specific appeals. In terms of what and who they fund, they like to fund registered charities, community interest companies, CICs, basically organisations that are there for the good of the community and not making a profit. They often base who they like to fund around a location. So geographically, there may be an area of the country that they like to support. So clearly, if you're working with organisations in Cornwall, you're looking for trusts that like to fund in Cornwall. They often have a type of beneficiary they want to support. So this could be everything from perhaps mental health through to hard to reach audiences. And there's often an area of work they like to support: health, education, conservation. Sometimes there's different grant programs within a trust. So it may be that generally they fund a certain type of beneficiary or an area of work, but sometimes they run grant programs. So it's worth keeping an eye on trusts to see if that changes. Sometimes there's a personal interest of the trustees, and this is where it's really good to research your trust to find out who the trustees, because you might actually know one of them or have contacts within your board that know them, and that's when it will open up those unsolicited applications. And they often have very clear exclusions. So that's where you really need to do your research and match up who you are against what the trust likes to fund. Having done all of that research on the trust, the grant form really is just the tip of the iceberg. There are lots of layers that you need to put in place before I would recommend you even open an application form or approach a trust. So you really need those foundation layers. This will make every application that you do easier, because there will be stock information that most trusts will want to know about you, as well as the very tailored stuff you put together. So if you have that information all together in the beginning, you'll have everything that you need to form the backbone. And it will also ensure, as you work through all of that information, that things stack up from your end and you have the full picture. So those are your layers. This is where we get down to the very specifics of what I recommend you have in place before you approach those trusts. So this is all information about your charity, and this is a checklist that I use when I'm working with charities to get most of this information in place before I start that approach. If you have all of this information, it's going to save you a lot of time, especially because it will be signed off by anyone that needs to sign off the information and be appropriate. So you're using information that you know is accurate and correct. Because with some cases, at the beginning of application forms especially, you will be filling out standard information. So it's great to have all of that information together. So I've grouped it here together, but I have put more detail in the notes, which I know that Sam and Debbie will be pleased to share with you. So don't worry about lots of scribbling, because I have got notes on all of this. To start with, you need to make sure that you've got your governing document or your constitution or whatever it is that says this is our charity and this is what we do. You need to have your structure. So are you a registered charity, a CIO? You need things like your registration number. Are you also registered for that? So all of those legal bits of information that you need. Then I often move on to the overview of your charity. What are your aims and objectives? What are you as an organisation trying to achieve? And how do you achieve this? I normally have all of that written down and approved. Again, you can copy and paste. There's often a word count you might need to bring it down to, but if you have that information to start with, it's helpful. Often this is in your accounts document, within other documents of your organisation. So you're finding information and putting it all together. Your annual report, things like the flow chart or structure of your board, your trustees, your employees, your leadership, and do you have any lived experience of what it is your charity is trying to achieve? Do you have anybody within your organisation that actually is or one of your beneficiaries or several? How do you engage your beneficiaries in the running of your organisation? Data, things like how many people you've helped within the last 12 months or perhaps since your organisation has started. How have you helped them, and how do you monitor the effectiveness of your organisation? Do you have any testimonials, case studies, people that you've helped, both for your volunteers and your beneficiaries? Trusts often want to know about the people that you're working with. Your volunteers are a really valuable part of your organisation. Next, I normally work through an organisation's policies and procedures. Do you have your policies close to hand? You'll often get to the end of an application process with a trust and they'll then ask the various policies, which is great if you have them all there to begin with before you start your application. This could be safeguarding, complaints procedure, your volunteer support, your equal opportunities. If you don't already have those in place, it's good practice to have these in place anyway. So often moving through what a trust needs is going to help you with the structure of your organisation. Often trusts will want to know, do you work in partnership? Do you work with any other organisations within your field? Do you receive referrals from anybody? Are you a member of any networks within Cornwall? Trusts really like it when you're working in partnership with other organisations. Even if it's not a formal partnership, if you just have a good working relationship with them. Do you have any examples of any previous grant applications, any letters to approach trusts? This will help you pull all of that information together, and is often something a trust will want to know. Do you already have any applications out there, especially against the thing you're applying for? And do you have any information on past support? If you've had support from a trust 5 years ago, you want to go back to the trust that has supported you before you approach new ones, in my opinion. And then right at the end, I list through what marketing tools you have. There will be some trusts that will want to know how you're going to share their support of you. Some will want to remain completely anonymous, but some trusts will want to know how you're sharing their support. And they will often have guidelines themselves within the criteria of what they would like you to do if they do award you funds. But I just tend to make a simple list, like your social media tools, your website, your newsletter, communications both with your volunteers and your beneficiaries. So that's a very quick whiz through of all of the types of information that I would have together before you start an application. Sorry, we'll come on to the finances in a second, but just to say that what I tend to do is put all of that information into a folder called grant support. So your policies, your things where you are just researching and pulling it in from other areas, not necessarily for you to put together, just to gain all of this information into one place. And then information like who you help, your aims and objectives, I put together in a Word document. I have it as concisely as I possibly can, keeping in mind that lots of applications will have word counts, but I get it all into one Word document that if needs be, I can copy and paste from. And I have that document signed off with whoever I need to sign it off from to ensure that that information is correct. That will then make it much easier when you start approaching any trust, be it an application form or almost a free flow form where you can put together the information yourself to provide to that trust. In some cases, that document itself is appropriate to use as your application, along with perhaps a project sheet on the thing you're asking for funding for. So as I said, all of that information is together in the notes, which I will have provided for Debbie and Sam to send to you all. But we also wanted to put a very detailed focus on the accounting side and what information you would need in there financially before approaching a trust. So Sam's going to cover this a little bit, and then I will come in and cover some areas as well. So over to you then, Sam.
Good morning, everyone. The first point on the slide there is the latest audited or signed accounts. There's often a misconception really about all accounts need to be audited. This isn't the case. So the level of income actually determines whether an organisation requires an audit or not. So the levels are, if your organisation has an income of over £1 million in an accounting period, and your accounts would need to be audited. We are not registered auditors, and therefore we provide independent examinations of your accounting records. So independent examinations are for organisations with income over 25,000. And what this means is an independent examination is a light touch scrutiny involving the examiner checking for specific matters only. Because it's narrowly defined and does not involve forming an opinion as to whether the accounts are true and fair, it usually costs less than an audit would. We work with organisations with charitable objectives and therefore specialise in the charity sector. So we also offer capacity building within our services. This is all part of producing signed accounts. So we just wanted to clarify that point, that not all accounts have to be audited. The second point on the slide is actually the management forecast or budget preparation. And we often get asked what management accounts are. So management accounts comprise of a profit and loss and a balance sheet. A profit and loss account shows income and expenditure, and a balance sheet shows you what you own and owe along with your funds. Management accounts are similar to year-end accounts, but are less formal and are often produced monthly or quarterly. A budget looks ahead at future income and expenditure and breaks this down into sources of where you're expecting the income and expenditure to come from. Helen, I'll hand back over to you.
Okay. So I've put a little note on here that says notes on accounts, and that's just what I call it. There are often, as you're moving through information about your organisation, there may be financial areas that seem on first impression complicated or tricky. And my advice on this is be very upfront about them. I have a document that I put together that's purely called Notes on Accounts, that goes through anything within the accounts that I feel needs further explanation, that just needs explaining, and then it makes sense. Often that isn't done within the accounts document. You're just reporting perhaps to your trust that you're applying to on your financial gaps and where you need funding. But sometimes you need to explain more than that, and basically don't sidestep this. If it stacks up within your organisation, then it will be something that you can explain to a potential funder. If you don't explain it to the funder and it leaves any grey areas, they're simply very unlikely to fund you. You might have a very strong application and somebody else might have a very strong application, and a funder can't fund everybody in most cases who approach them. So if they're not sure about something within your organisation stacking up, and you may even look like a financial risk, they're going to choose the other organisation over you, or simply not fund you at all because it isn't all stacking up. So for me, the notes on account document is a really, really important one to make sure all the information is straight for the trust you're applying to funding for, but also within your organisation. You know, there will be things that look tricky. There are lots of things that are complicated, but it will all stack up for your organisation. So it's a case of really succinctly and accurately explaining that picture for the trust. So when they look at your accounts and then they kind of have questions, they look at this document and say, I've got it, it makes sense. So this is your opportunity to explain anything that you think may trip you up within your application that you haven't already had a chance to explain, and just be very upfront about that information. And then finally, your bank statements. You may have a bank statement or bank statements. Again, a PDF of these bank statements within the last 3 months is something that I have in my documents file before approaching a trust. They will often ask you for a bank statement from the bank account you would like the money paid into attached to the application. They might be wanting to see if financially it all stacks up and what you say you've got in the bank, you do have in the bank. But also they want to know that they've got the details to make the payment into. Those bank statements will also reflect some of the information that you've put in your notes on accounts, which will particularly, you'll really want to put in your notes on accounts, about your restricted funding and your unrestricted or unallocated, undesignated, whatever term you use within your charity. So you want to be able to explain in your notes and accounts, in light of your bank statements and your financial forecasting, this is the money we've got in our bank account. This money is restricted for these things, which is why we're unable to use it for this thing we're asking for funding for. You will probably then be saying, as you'll see, we have further money in our bank account. That is technically unrestricted money. Some of that unrestricted money we have already designated or allocated to this thing, leaving this remaining of free reserves, which is why we probably, you're hoping at that point, don't have enough money for the thing you're asking for funding for. We're very safe. We know where our money's being spent, and we know we have restricted funding, but we need your funding for this particular element. Hopefully, within your notes on accounts, you're explaining that you have a certain amount of money in your bank account for your operating costs or under your free reserves in line with your reserves policy. You'll probably have a reserves policy that says this is how much money we need to have in our bank account. Again, something that will be explained in your notes and accounts. And also to say, lots of charities might be in a position right now where they've used their reserves, they're using their money that are in their bank accounts purely to survive. This is probably one of the times where trusts will understand if you don't have the money in your reserves that you should have in there and that you need to build them back up. And there will actually be trusts out there right now that will help with that when you do your research. So that's all they all hang together. From all of that, you hopefully will have identified your gaps in funding. From your money coming in and money going out, you'll know where you have those gaps, and that's where you're going to be applying for your funding for assistance, if it's appropriate to apply for that particular need to a trust. So that was our focus around the detail on finance. Are you happy that covers everything, Sam? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Future training is where we come on to the gaps in funding, using the information from your backbone today on your organisation. So what we're talking about today is very, very specific to your organisation and the overall picture of your organisation, everything from its mission and its objectives and its beneficiaries and its volunteers and its structure and all of those things. Not so much about the project you want the funding for. It's important to have all of that backbone in place before you then think, right, where do we need that funding? It may be the running and the core costs, which will come up through all the work that you've done, but I think it will then identify your gaps in funding in terms of the things you want to do moving forward. You then need to build a separate case for support for the thing you're going to ask for funding for. It's quite overwhelming to cover all of that in one session, which is why we're doing the backbone today about your organisation, and then we'll come on to the training for the specific thing that you want funding for. And then once you have your project sheet on what you want your funding for, that's when you really start your research on your trusts, because your backbone of who you are and what you do is what the trusts will want to support in terms of the type of things they like to support. Your research on the trust will then match up. They like to fund this particular project we want funding for, and how that trust likes to be approached. Lots of this information with regards to the trust will be on their own website. It will also be on the Charity Commission's website. And then once you've made that application, however is appropriate for that trust, then you need to manage the outcome. Whether you're successful or unsuccessful, there's an outcome to manage there. Not least of all, if you're unsuccessful, perhaps getting some feedback as to why, and going back in 12 months' time, so that all the work you've done to that point isn't lost and it's an investment for next time. If you're successful, there'll be reporting that you need to go through, and generally keeping in contact with that trust to keep that trust support. But those are covered in later training sessions. We wanted to mention at this point that there is a poll that Sam and Debbie will be sharing at the end, where if you would like some further training on those areas, or the notes for today or anything else, it is included in the poll. So you can contact them through the poll or directly if you'd like to request any of that information. And then we have a section for questions. I've taken about half an hour covering the information that you would need to put together, and I appreciate it is all very overwhelming, but you don't need to remember it all because I do have that list. But if anybody has any specific questions that they wanted to ask, we wanted to leave some time at the end for you to do that. So would it be a good plan if I stop sharing this document now, Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to stop the share. And I'm going to get rid of that. Oh, hello, everybody.
This is everywhere.
There we go. So did anybody, sorry, Sam, have you got questions coming through the chat, or did you want to ask people first?
I was going to, does everyone want to unmute? And I know we've had a couple of messages about just networking amongst ourselves on here as well. Is that a good idea for everyone? Cool. So if everyone wants to unmute themselves. So we have actually got a question come through, Helen.
Okay.
And this is from Jamie Lee. Where is the best place to find trusts to apply for?
That's the golden question I get asked every time I do any kind of trust funding. It's a really good question, and it's what everybody really needs to know. There are places that you can pay to subscribe to, and there are free places that you can get information from. It depends on the budget of your charity and how much you want to invest into this. There is something called the Charity Excellent Framework, which is a free fundraising database, which has recently been put together in the last year or so. I will send the link to that to Sam and Debbie so that they can share the link out to you. That's where I recommend at the moment, because it is that free resource. I'm just going to make a note of that. Charity Excellent Framework. The Charity Commission is a really good place to search. There is a search bar there, and there are paid databases, which again I will send some links to those paid databases. I think I might have already sent you some of these already, Sam, but I will add to it.
Okay.
I also look at organisations like mine, you know, who else is working in my field that has perhaps had funding where I'm not going to step on toes. I obviously don't want to poach their funding, but if I can see that they've recently had that funding, the trust isn't going to go back to them for a further 12 months. So I know that I can start researching there, or perhaps a trust has funded the type of organisation that I'm working for 4 or 5 years ago, which I can see from their own accounts that might be on the Charity Commission. Another good place to keep an eye on is Cornwall Volunteer Sector Forum, who put out a email most days with some funding opportunities, and also historically have funders still on their website that they've shared information about. Another really good place to try is the Cornwall Community Foundation. If they don't, they have a grant programme on there that lists the grants that they're managing right now. But even if you're not appropriate for the grants they have listed there, whenever I call them, they have been incredibly helpful, with sharing information on other places that I could go to look for funding. So those are a few kind of off the top of my head, but what I will do is I will send an email to Debbie and Sam with some bullet points and some links, which can be shared back out with you. I mean, are there other ones that people hear in terms of, you know, networking and talking about ourselves? Is anybody here using a database that they think is particularly good?
Oh, you're right.
We've had a message from Graham, and it mentions about the Oxford Innovation.
About where, sorry?
Oxford Innovation.
I just went on to check that afternoon. Let me just, before you hang up the phone, let me just double check. And I haven't checked, I managed to put a listing up, so I'm assuming that, yeah, it's all fine.
Want to mute themselves.
Where's Helen gone?
We had, there was a question in the chat, Sam, about how things differ for unincorporated organisations.
Okay.
Which, if Helen's out of action for the moment, then perhaps we can answer that one. A lot of the trusts, if you're a very small organisation, it depends on how much money you're looking for. If you've got a constitution with charitable objectives, a lot of people, you know, some of the trusts will fund you. In some cases, what they would want you to be doing is saying that you will have a more formal constitution at some time in the future, and that perhaps your part of your project will be to lift up your organisation from being unincorporated to then either becoming a CIC or registered with the Charity Commission. And just to note that any unincorporated charitable organisations that are not registered with the Charity Commission, you have a limit of income of £5,000 per year before you're required to be registered.
Can you hear me again?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, right, back in the room. Brilliant. If you're not incorporated, the trust will have its, it will clearly lay out who it will and won't fund in its own criteria. So that's where your research will come in. If there's a particular trust that you've identified at the beginning of your research to say, you know, that they like the type of work you're doing on the beneficiaries you're helping, when you then bury down into your research, it will often state from that trust's own information what type of organisations they will support, whether you have to be a registered charity or whether you can just be a non-profit grassroots organisation. It will say that often within the trust's own information, and that's where your research comes in.
Also, one of the things that we didn't mention, I don't know if it's on your list, is the Growth Hub, Helen, because the Growth Hub have been quite helpful. I know that Graham's mentioned Oxford Innovation have been helpful in finding organisations, but the Growth Hub will do a similar thing. Yeah,
I'm just noting it down to see if it's on the list that I send it over. I personally haven't spoken to the Growth Hub. I mean, I've spoken to them about other things, not least of all my own business, but I haven't spoken to them about coming up with perhaps a list of trusts that I might be able to apply to. So that's really helpful to know that they might be able to do that. I presume that was more on the business side. So if they can help non-profits, then that's great.
Okay,
we've just got another message. Catherine just wants you to clarify the point on the £5,000.
Yeah, okay. Any organisation that is unincorporated and operating as just without any kind of formal structure, if you're operating as a charity and your income is above £5,000, you are required to be registered with the Charity Commission. Does that make it more clear, Catherine?
Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
We've got quite a few ideas in the chat about looking for funds, so we'll try and incorporate all of those in the frequently asked questions so that you've got that to take away. Have you got a couple of other questions, Sam?
Yeah, I've just got a document to share with everyone that I'm just getting. So, can everyone see that?
Small.
Something's coming. Yes.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so one of the questions that we do often get asked about accounts is, where would I find my reserves? So one of our clients has actually agreed for us to share their balance sheet with yourselves today, and it was just purely to point out where your funds are actually and reserves are actually shown in the bottom of a balance sheet. So where Helen's already touched on the restricted funds, so that would be in this case the 177,126, and then any unrestricted funds, which are general funds, they haven't got any stipulation of how they're used. That's the 295,784, and then any designated funds that have a restriction set by your organisation is the 5,329. so making up the total 472,239. That would be the total reserves.
A lot of application forms will actually say, what are your free reserves? And your free reserves are your unrestricted reserves.
What you're trying to do also with that within your trust application is show how financially you're safe, but you have a clear need. So if you have lots and lots of money in your bank account and you haven't explained why it's in there, you could, as well as potentially needing to look safe, that you're not at risk if you get funded, that you could fold within 6 months. You also need to show that you don't have too much money in there. It's okay to have money in your bank account as long as you can explain why you can't use it for the thing you're asking them for funding for. Otherwise, they'll just say, well, you've got enough funding, use the money that you've got.
Helen, can you see that other question that's come through in the chat?
I can't. Things are just kind of, the box disappears as soon as something pops back over the top of it.
Okay, I'll read it out if you want. Do you have any advice for applying through corporate community trusts? We are planning to apply for the Aviva Community Trust, which is for employees to vote for which causes to support, and also involves a crowdfunding scheme.
Yeah, so companies, as well as perhaps having set up a trust, that kind of falls to me in the realms of corporate fundraising. So there are lots of ways that companies get involved with supporting charities, from having a corporate trust through to initiatives like the Aviva Fund, which often comes down to voting. There's normally something else you have to do alongside than just putting in, for example, an application form. Sometimes you have to get the employees vote on who they want to support, or the public vote for who they want to support. Aviva one comes up quite often, and I've always found that trusts that I'm researching at the same time as looking at Aviva are going to be more cost effective in terms of the time that I need to put in if I'm going into it cold. If you already have some link there and some reason why you think, you know, you might be chosen or you might be voted for, then, or you have a very, very big supporter base that you kind of action into doing whatever it is you need them to do, then it starts to snap up. It all depends on what the criteria is, what they need you to do, and whether you can fulfill it without it being this massive exercise on top of what you're already doing. If it fits within your organisation and you can see that it would work, then go for it. For me, it hasn't been the most cost-effective way forward.
Helen, I'm not sure if sort of looking at things like Aviva would come in the further training, but one of the things that might be useful for people is to have some case studies. If you have case studies of what you're doing and some beneficiaries that have given permission for you to use images of them, anyone that's sort of looking at voting and taking a public, looking at the public interest, having a good case study or 2 or 3 case studies which have got nice photos showing what everybody's doing, that will help sort of put your case forward effectively. I think we've got a question on the best place to look for core funding as well.
So this comes down to your trust research. Often when you're using these research databases, they will enable you to bury it down in terms of the type of funding it is that you're looking for. I know that the Funding Central database I've used in the past lets you tick whether you're looking for core cost, project cost, and will let you narrow it down in that way. Basically, I think the more finance you can potentially put into the type of database you're using, the more specific it will let you get when you're searching. Other than that, it's looking at the trusts type of things that they like to support. And often grant programs are changing. So if you look at, for example, Wolfson, that supported capital for the last, during this year, they took that focus away from capital to help with that core funding because of what was happening in the community. So either it's using those tick boxes that a funding database, search database will let you tick for your core funding, or looking for a trust that likes the kind of work that you do in terms of your beneficiaries, and then checking that trust own information to see if they will support core costs. I try to build the core costs into projects because typically it was harder to find funding for core costs rather than new exciting services or projects. So I try to build a core cost element into those new projects or services.
I seem to have lost Sam and Helen. I'm not sure if oh yeah, there you are. You come back in there.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We've got another question on any advice on applications for matched funding schemes.
Okay. In terms of charities that like to match, sorry, in terms of trusts that like to match fund, do you mean? Ian's nodding, so I'm thinking that might be Ian's question.
Yeah. A number of schemes that in some areas you can apply and have match funding that will get greater leverage on your either double or even triple. It just
quite often do a matched funding. Some of the banks do. It's all about kind of strategy. You're going to be lining up probably, if you're going for a big ask, you're probably going to be lining up a few different trusts in terms of applying for the funding. So I would have that matched funding one, knowing I'm going to go to it, but make my other applications first, so that when I go to the match funding, I actually have that funding either pledged or very likely coming or already coming from that other trust, or through a different fundraising stream. So perhaps I could be looking at if I've got volunteers that are doing any kind of fundraising, could I use that to lever it and say, you know, we've already, for our project, we need X, we've already raised some through, or we are raising from some through our volunteers, or this is where your financial forecasting that Sam was going through will really help you, because what I do is I look at, well, where else do I have any funds coming from, regardless of whether I thought in the first place it was going to be for this thing I was asking for the money for, where else have I got funding from, and can I use that to go to the match funder and say, I've already raised this, or it's coming in, this is where I'm forecasting it's going to come from. It's about what stage in the game, I suppose, you go to the match funder, and you go to them later on. It's not the initial one you go to.
Yeah, so build up your funds that you want matched, rather than there's no or disadvantage in, if you like, admitting that where you got your funds.
Funds need to be in place before they would consider funding you, or whether they're one that says we like to match fund. You can talk to us at the beginning. You might not have them in place yet, but you might have an idea where they're coming from, and that's when you start talking to us. It all depends on how that trust likes to work. But I actually find, as much as it can be very nerve-wracking to pick up the phone and talk to a trust, and I'm still nervous every time I pick up the phone to a trust, I have never yet regretted picking up the phone. I've never come off the phone thinking, oh, crikey, I wish I'd kept that one under my hat, or told them something a little bit different. I would phone the trust and say to them, at what point do we need to come to you? How certain do these funds need to be? And deliver it in the way they ask you to.
We've had you coming through a bit quiet, Helen. A few people have had problems with the sound, but it seems to have come back recently.
Okay, sorry.
There was, Catherine came back with wanting a bit more clarification on the 5,000 for registration with the Charity Commission, and that is actually total income. So it does include the grant income. So if you've received grants and you've gone over £5,000, then yes, I would expect you to be registering with the Charities Commission now.
Debbie, I was just having a chat with Catherine, but I just thought.
There was a question on the landfill community fund. Have you had it? Has anybody else had experience of that? Have you had experience of it, Helen?
I've had experience in so much as I've researched them to the point to find that in most cases the organisations that I'm working with can't apply. I had to be within a certain mileage of a site, which more organisations might find that they are within distance now. But when I was looking at applying, the 3 organisations that I've actually got to the point of researching, none of them could apply. At one point, it seemed to go centrally to Scotland, but it might have changed again since then. So I haven't applied to the landfill yet, no.
Okay, and they do have this strange thing where you have to pay a part of it back, don't you? So they kind of give you 100% and then you pay a proportion back. Yeah,
it just wasn't as straightforward as some of the other trusts that I could have been applying to. And there are, there's lots and lots of trusts out there, and a piece of advice I would say is if you're just not sure and it could be a bit of a punt, don't do it. Spend your time going after those trusts that you know you're an excellent fit for. And if you're still thinking, well, yeah, but I don't know, phone them. Just pick up the phone and phone them. As long as they don't say no unsolicited approaches. I think that the thing with landfill is that they often come under other names. So you might find that they're coming under BIFA. Their website is the best place to start there.
And Emma's also mentioned that Cornwall Tarmac and BIFA are in Cornwall at the moment.
Okay.
I have worked with an organisation that's had some of the landfill tax, and the way that they seemed to work it was that the landfill paid them the grant and then they ended up paying back part of it as part of that contribution. It all seemed very odd to me, but it just reduces the amount that they give you at the end of the day.
That's how it appeared to me. It kind of, it looks like you're going to get this grant fund for the project that you need or whatever it is that you need, but actually in the long run you don't have all of that money, and it would be really hard, for example, to find a trust to fund. A trust wouldn't fund that money you've got to give back. It would have to come from another income stream within your organisation. So it just all seemed a little bit too complicated for what I was trying to achieve with the funding applications.
Okay. Graham's mentioned about being a CIC. Would it help anybody to just sort of go through the points between charity and CIC? We've got some yeses. Okay. So a charity, there are a number of different types of charity. So you can actually be an unincorporated charity, so registered with the Charity Commission, and you only need to put your accounts onto the Charity Commission if your income is over £25,000. You can become a charitable incorporated organisation, which is registered with the Charity Commission, but you have to, because you've got the limited liability as being incorporated, which limited liability is effectively what safeguards the trustees of the organisation from if somebody decided to sue you for whatever, they're suing the organisation, and they can only go to the individuals if there is negligence. So being incorporated is a bit of a safeguard for the trustees. So the payoff in terms of being incorporated means that you have to upload your accounts to the Charity Commission website, no matter what your income is. So you have to do that every year. Now, a CIC is a community interest company, which is registered with Companies House, and to all intents and purposes, it's like a normal limited company in terms of your responsibilities for annual accounts and a corporation tax return, which has to be done every year. You also have to do a narrative report for a CIC, which includes an explanation of what you've done for the community and what kind of feedback or consultation you've had with your stakeholders, anybody who has an interest in what you're doing. There is also a fee, so you are charged £13 just for an annual confirmation statement, and it's £15 to go with that narrative report and your accounts every year. So there is sort of ongoing charges for a CIC, as well as needing to make sure that you submit your annual accounts on time. It's slightly easier nowadays for a CIC because there is an online filing arrangement, which has only come in the past 12 months. So it is possible for you to do your accounts and fill in the form online. Whereas previously you really needed to get an accountant to do your accounts and fill them in. Otherwise, the chances of you not getting it right could be quite high. But if you feel confident in your bookkeeping records, then it is possible for people to run CICs and fill in the forms themselves if they've not got too much income. For me, the biggest difference between charity and CIC is that charity trustees cannot normally be paid. There is a way of allowing people to be paid for services. So for instance, if your trustees, one of them happens to be an accountant like myself, you could pay that trustee for preparing your accounts, but you cannot pay them for being a trustee, if that makes sense. Whereas a CIC, the directors can be the founders and working within the company and can be paid without any issues. And the negative side of the CIC is that your surpluses will be subject to corporation tax. Charities, because they're registered charities, have an exemption from corporation tax on anything that they do which supports their main purpose. So it's a case of control. So if you're a person who's setting up an organisation, do you go for CIC or do you go for a charity? If it's you wanting to set it up and you want to earn a salary from it, realistically, you shouldn't be a trustee because you have a bit of a conflict of interest there. So the trustees are the people that are in charge of the company. So you would lose a little bit of control there. Whereas in a CIC, you can be a director, be in control and pay yourself. So it's that control against the tax that you're going to have to pay on any surpluses. We've also found with some of our clients that trusts, there is a wider variety of trusts to get grants from for a charity than there is for a CIC. So what some people have done is started out as a CIC, and then when they realised that they need to go to somebody who won't give to CICs, then they've started a charity as well. But then, of course, you've got two different sets of governance to contend with.
That's been my experience as well. CICs are harder to find the funding for in terms of the type of organisation a trust likes to support. The trust will support the work, the beneficiaries, what you're trying to achieve, like they would if you're a registered charity, but they may not fund a CIC. But if you then decide to go down the route of having those two arms, that's something that you can explain in your notes on your accounts.
Just want to pick up on the point that Elise and Chris were making in terms of whether you should have a charity and a CIC. And Chris has made the point that it depends on what you're doing. So a charity is allowed to trade and receive income for what they're doing, providing what they're doing relates to their main purposes. So in that case, you don't need to have an alternative trading company. A trading company that a charity would have can be a normal limited company, doesn't have to be a CIC, and would normally be used for something that is not part of your primary purpose trading. So if you wanted to earn income, so let's see, I'm trying to think of a good example here. So we're a charity and we provide accountancy services for other charities. If we wanted to go and provide accountancy services for commercial purposes, we couldn't do that within the charity because it's not part of our purposes. But we could have a trading company that did that, and that trading company can then donate all of their profits back to us. Does that clarify that point?
What are the current thresholds for doing non-primary purpose? I can't remember what they are. It used to be a percentage or 50,000, didn't it? I can't remember what it is now.
It is 25% of your income. I think, let's see, I'd have to go and look up the exact ones, but it's basically 25% of your income. And I think you're right, it is a maximum of £50,000.
So in fact, we could actually do a few commercial accounts as long as it wasn't 25% of our income.
Yes. And in actual fact, what we do, I'll just let you into a secret here, because I run my own commercial practice. If there is spare capacity within CCAS, I will subcontract the staff to work for me. And that actually means that helps CCAS keep going. But I'd be hasten to point out that I'm not abusing the charity in any way.
I mean, I work with people that do have two companies, and it is a lot of extra work having two entities. And a lot of them wouldn't have needed to do it in the first place because they're not doing enough non-primary purpose trading.
Yeah, it is something that you need to think carefully about, because having two organisations, you've got two lots of governance to go through. So I would only do it if you really feel that non-charitable side is going to take off. If you're a charity.
I think the big examples of these are that there are charities that have bought bits of land and turned it into a car park, which has made them a lot of money. So they've had to form a separate company to do that because car parking has nothing to do with their charity.
Okay. But yeah, in the current climate, it is something to be thinking about. So if you cannot keep going, doing what you want to do according to your charitable objectives, looking at fundraising, doing something completely different might be something that you need to do. And then it's a case of working out just how much do you need and can you manage it within the trading requirements. There is a charity commission publication called Charities and Trading, and we can let you have the PDF of that with our documentation if that would help.
The other thing that might affect your trading the amounts that you can trade up to, that just to throw into the mix is if you're looking into corporate sponsorship. So lots of charities are diversifying where their funds are coming from right now because they can't do lots of community events. And corporate sponsorship is one way to look at perhaps when companies are more active in terms of their marketing budgets. If you start receiving corporate sponsorship and it pushes you over those limits, that's something that you need to take into account, because the corporate is receiving clear and agreed marketing benefits in return for the money that they're giving you. So it's classed as trading.
You've gone quiet again, Helen.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
It's still quite quiet.
I'm going to sit very close to my speaker. It might get a bit echoey. Debbie, you will know more about this than me, but because I also, with a different hat on, get involved with corporate sponsorship, so companies giving money in return for very clear marketing returns, not donations, clear and agreed marketing terms in advance, that's classed as trading, and that can impact on the amount that you can bring in through those channels as well. So that's just something to be mindful of, because I know that a lot of charities are diversifying their fundraising as well as trusts. We're having to look at where funds can come from right now, because they can't necessarily come through community fundraising and events because of restrictions. So lots more charities are looking at corporate sponsorship. So I just wanted to mention that in case it's something you're thinking of.
Yes, I think one of the things with sponsorship to consider is that corporate giving is obviously one of the things that we can look at when we're fundraising, but and most corporate organisations will want their name on your website. They will want to be recognised that they're funding you, but that doesn't constitute sponsorship. So sponsorship, which is a little bit more than that. So it's a fine line, isn't it, Helen, in terms of how you define that sponsorship role?
Yeah, you'd get away with acknowledging them, with thank you in your newsletter or a mention on your website. That's fine. But if it starts to get more than that, and there are clear marketing benefits, brand endorsement, routes into your audiences, that's trading on your name, therefore, or your brand, so therefore part of your trading.
I haven't done too much research, to be honest, on sponsorship, but I will go to the Charity Commission and see if I can find any guidance on that we can send out for you.
I should have it to hand somewhere, so I can send the link over to you that you can then distribute out through. And I also have some thresholds that you can take sponsorship up to, but that is part of your trading. So I'll send it over to you, Debbie, and you can have a look, see what I've got.
Okay, that'd be grand. I think have we covered all the questions on the chat at the moment?
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions that have come in via email, and there's some relating to the documents that you need and where you can get them. In terms of governing documents, some organisations that have been around for a while are wondering where they're going to find it if everyone's left and what have you. I would anticipate that the best place to look would be Companies House. You can actually look up Companies House online for organisations, and they actually have history going back years and years and years. Had a client I was working with a couple of weeks ago, and we had to go back to the 1970s to get their governing document. It does give rise to the question that if you haven't looked at your governing document since the 1970s, perhaps you really should, to see whether it's still current and to see whether your objects are still current to what you're actually doing. And I would say that most donors would want to be looking at your governing document, and they would want to be checking that the governing document allows you to do what you are currently doing. And
Yeah.
I have been involved with a number of organisations who, when they've realised what's in their governing document, because it's a long time ago since they looked at it, they actually have realised that what they're doing now isn't covered under it, and they've had to amend it.
Yeah, it's also from a trust application point of view. That's why it's so important to try and have all this information in your documents folder before you go, because often those documents are asked for at the end of the application. And as much as you can often, if it's an online application, you can often save it and go back into it. If you're up against a deadline and you've put all that work in to get to the point where you're just about to hit submit and they ask you to attach those documents, and then you have to go and find them, it can often push you past the deadline. If you're very prepared and very in advance and you've got weeks until the deadline, that's fine. But if you're sometimes hitting submit just before that deadline passes for that trust and you can't find those documents, it's incredibly frustrating and you will have lost all that time.
Okay, I've got a couple on policies and procedures. Do you want to cover? So I've got one that relates to standard policies and procedures and where you could get those from, and there's a couple of specific policies that we've been asked about. Do you want to cover those, Helen?
I'm happy to say as much as I know about them, because in terms of my experience, what I'm tending to do is use those documents in order to then make the trust application, rather than the kind of setting up and the governance of the charity or the non-profit in the first place. If I needed to help an organisation to put a policy in place, the first place I personally would go to is the Institute of Fundraising, because I'm a full member and hopefully could use their resources. If they don't have a template, which I found they didn't when I asked for a specific one this week, they will have guidance on how to put that template or that policy together. Or I would try somewhere like Cornwall Volunteer Sector Forum, or again, the Charity, Cornwall Community Foundation, the Charity Commission. Those are the types of places that I would be going to for what policies you should have in place in the first place, and whether there are any templates that you could use. With something, for example, an ethical policy, it would be very specific to your organisation, your mission, your ethos. So I found, just trying to find an ethical policy, for example, this week, there isn't a template that's very easy to put your hands on that you could just fill in your own ethical policy. I received, probably from contacting the Institute of Fundraising and the Charity Commission and my network. So there is a trust fundraising network on Facebook that you might find helpful to join. In all of those places that I asked, I had lots of useful information come back in and examples of other people's templates that you could make your own, but not just a template. I can't point you towards an organisation with a link that says, here's all the templates for all the policies, fill in the gaps.
Okay, the other one that I've got is reserves policies and what's appropriate for a reserves policy. Shall I take that one, Helen?
Yeah.
Okay. Reserves policy is a bit like the others. It depends on what your organisation is like and what your current operating costs are. So it used to be that a typical reserves policy was that you would have 3 months running costs plus any closure costs. So if you had redundancy costs for staff who have been in place for years and years, you need to be able to cover those. And also considering that potentially 3 months costs would be a quarter of rent or something like that. But you also need to consider that if you have a lease, so if you had a 5-year lease on an office, for instance, you would need to make sure that you had in your reserves the amount it would cost you to get out of that lease if you had to close. So we're talking redundancy costs, leasing costs, and a certain amount of operating costs. In the current climate, where funding is so difficult to get nowadays, donors are quite happy to accept that you would need 6 months or more operating costs. I think if they saw that you had over a year's operating costs in your reserves, they'd think, well, that's probably too much, and why would they fund you if you've got so much in reserves? But certainly between 6 and 12 months would not be out of the way, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I'm normally around that 6 months point. So I've normally allocated some of my reserves to say, we have these costs that we have to meet for the next 12 months, whether, you know, we're delivering our services or not, we have to pay those costs out. And then between about 3 to 6 months of unrestricted reserves to meet our operating costs, to keep running for 6 months, to allow the charity that lead-in time to bring in extra funds if suddenly, as most people have found, their fundraising incomes are just decimated because of something that's happened. If you've got more than 6 months, a trust is, without an explanation on your notes and accounts, a trust is really unlikely to fund you. They'll say, use your own money.
Anybody got any comments on the reserves? Are you all happy with that? All looking good? Okay, my final question that was asked was one on gift aid, and how do you go about organising gift aid? How do you claim it? It's pretty much a subject which you could go on about forever. But the basics are, you have to be registered with HMRC and recognised as a charity. So that's on top of your registration with the Charity Commission. There is a form called, it's a HMRC form called CHA1, which you would have to complete and send to HMRC to make sure you, they have to recognise you as a charity. And that, even if you're a small charity under 5,000 and you're not registered with the Charity Commission, you can still be recognised as a charity for HMRC purposes. I'm afraid that CICs will not be recognised as HMRC by HMRC as a charity, so you won't get gift aid if you're a CIC. Once you are registered with HMRC as a charity, they will give you a charity reference number, and you will use that in their online systems to make a claim for gift aid. Effectively, you have to have a government gateway number, which is what you have with nearly all HMRC systems, and you register online to get access to the gift aid module. Once you've got that, it's a case of going through the screen, making a claim. They have a specific spreadsheet that you have to download and complete for all of your donations. And then you would just, once you've completed that spreadsheet, you upload it, and it goes into the HMRC system to complete your claim. Before that, when somebody makes a donation to you, you have to make sure that you've got a gift aid declaration from them. So every individual that donates to you needs to sign a gift aid form to say that they pay tax up to the value of the gift aid that you get. What gift aid is what used to be a charity relief on individuals. So an individual can choose to give to a charity, but they can take the tax relief themselves if they want to. By giving a gift aid declaration, they're saying that you can have the tax relief as on top of the donation that they're giving you. Thanks for the question, Alison. I've just seen that one pop up. You can go back 4 years for your gift aid claims. So if you're not registered as a charity yet with HMRC, but you've been receiving donations, you can register now and go back for the past 4 financial years to claim back. There is also something called the Gift Aid Small Donation Scheme, which if somebody gives you something under £20, so a bit like a collection, you can get gift aid on that. But you have to have ordinary gift aided donations in order to get it. And the deadline for the Gift Aid Small Donation Scheme is 3 years rather than 4 years. So just to be careful with that. Yeah, just a little bit I'm seeing on the chat about CICs, and yeah, I'm sorry, CICs, according to HMRC, you're just a normal limited company. They're not going to give you gift aid, and they're a bit horrid.
With the small gifts, I missed that bit. You have to have been claiming, don't you, for the previous 2 years? So, and a lot of people, like, there's a lot of
Come up on the chat in terms of reserves, and if you have 2 small reserves, would donors look badly on that? Would that sort of count you out for an application? Do you want to sort of give your opinion on that, Helen?
Yeah, not if you can explain why. So if I'm working with a charity at the moment that's, sorry, not at the moment, in the past, where they were actually in a deficit position, but they had clearly started turning that around in the last audited accounts. They had their audited accounts, and they had projected how they were going to be in a really positive position by the end of this 12 months. And where that money was coming from, you could clearly see was going to happen. They were going to raise that money, so they weren't a financial risk. If you've got no money in your reserves and you are looking like you're desperately trying to get funding to keep going, you need to be looking at the trusts that will support charities in that position. And there will be funders out there that will consider that. But what you don't want to do is apply to a trust that isn't prepared for that high risk, clearly showing that you might be that risk. And if they fund you, that you might be contacting them in 3 or 4 months later to say, actually, we're going to have to close down. So that's all about your either tackling that one in your notes on accounts, or within the application itself, making it really clear where your funding is going to be coming from.
One of the things I'd probably just like to point out at that point is that if you're very low on reserves, you do need to consider how long you can keep operating for, and make sure that you're not likely to go into negative reserves. Going into negative unrestricted reserves would normally be considered negligent on a trustee. So you do need to very much be aware of where you are, what your commitments are, and that you're not going to go into negative reserves. I think that's all my questions, actually. Okay. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to, I think it's a good time to do the poll that we've got on any future training. So,
yeah, good.
Let's have a look. So just going back to Helen's presentation, she mentioned the additional levels of training that are available. So there was level 2, 3 and 4. So you should be able to see a poll on your screen now. We just wanted to get a flavour of what the response would be if we were to run any future sessions.
Do you want me to tell you what those levels are, where you've got your level 2, 3 and 4?
Yeah, can you just give a brief summary, Helen, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to find my document to make sure I give you the right level. Okay, so normally the next stage of training that I would deliver is around your projects that you actually want to fund. So what the funding gaps are, and then packaging that up with its aims and objectives, who's going to benefit, how you'd monitor it, how you'd fund it in the longer term. So it's all about fitting that thing you're going to ask for funding for within your organisation. So that would be level 2. The next level that I then break it into is finding, researching and approaching those trusts, which comes back to the question of where do we find the funding from in the first place. It covers different places you can go to find that funding, how to research and how best to approach the trusts. And then the level 4 is managing the outcome, whether you are unsuccessful, how you turn that around into a potential positive in the future, and how you keep those trusts on board and what they might need you to communicate throughout the year.
Great, those are coming in now, so we'll just keep that running a minute.
Lovely comments. Everyone's got a few people saying interested in all levels. For the people who can't see the poll, I found that when I went to look at the chat, the poll disappeared, but then just at the top of my screen, there's a very little button that says poll in progress. And if you click on that one, it then comes up. But if you're struggling with it, I'm sure that we can take something from the chat.
Yeah.
Will it let you click on all levels, Sam, or do you have to just click one and then hit submit?
Yeah, it's just got the option for one.
Okay.
And you see the answers coming through there, Sam?
Yep. So we've had 13 responses, and most of those are on level 2. But from the comments as well, it seems that levels are a popular response as well. So that's great. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm just going to end that one.
Oh, cool. You get the answers.
There we go.
I personally just pressed level 2 because it was the first one I could press and hit submit.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if anybody else did that, which is why level 2 might be higher.
Well, I think what that tells us is that you're all kind of happy to keep going with this, and we would like to carry it on as part of our project. So we'll be looking to put dates in from sort of January to February of next year to carry on with Helen.
I would love to. Thank you. As nervous as I am and how I flew through the initial bit, so I'm sorry, there's a lot of information and I realised I'd flown through it very quickly, but knew that I could give you all the backup. I feel much calmer now. I can see everyone's faces, and I'd love to share the rest with you. If you choose to work with another, I completely appreciate that as well.
Bless you, Helen. I think we've had a good morning this morning. So yeah, thank you very much. Sam, have you got another poll there that you wanted to put out?
I have. I've just got a bit of background on the project Debbie touched on the project that I'm involved with, and along with Debbie at the moment, at the start, and we're actually running part of the coronavirus project, so assessing the financial impact on charities in Cornwall. So currently I've been working, and Debbie, alongside individual organisations, helping them to forecast their expected year-end positions for early next year into 2021. And that's all been part of the funding that we've received through the National Lottery Community Fund. And that's how we've been able to hold this event today. So we're actually exploring the option of whether any further online forecast training for small groups in the future would be useful to any participants today in our training. So we do actually have another poll. Let's see if this one will work as well.
Thanks, Graham. What we have found, and I don't know whether this applies for all of you, that some people are good for this year, going up to the end of this year, but next year it's really going to start hitting people. So when we're looking at these forecasts, we will be sort of wanting you to look sort of a good 12 to 18 months in advance. Particularly when you're thinking about these trust applications, because you've got such a long lead time for them. So that's sort of where we're coming from.
And it's not only the forecasting aspect of accounting, we're actually thinking about holding specific sessions on accounting topics. So there may be one a month where it'll be on a specific accounting topic, and then alternating through a set sort of program on those. So it's just whether there would be interest on those in the future as well. Okay, so I think we're 14 responses on that. That's excellent. So there's definitely we're looking for future support on that, and as we're now working from Zoom as our new normal, then that's really good that everyone's willing to get involved with that. So that's excellent. We'll obviously communicate as and when we decide on which topics early in the new year.
And I guess actually, if anybody has specific topics that you're interested in, do email us and we'll take that into account.
Definitely. And finally, Debbie, do you have anything else before I show the slides?
No, I think Sam's going to tell you about our exciting technology now, which is something that I've been looking at for a number of years and not been able to do it. And finally, with the funding from the lottery, we've managed to. So Sam's going to explain that to you.
Okay, so screen.
I think we just got to organise sharing the screen so that you can see what we're up to.
So you should be able to see it now.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So this is our new app. So on the left-hand side is an example of what the homepage looks like on our app. And we're actually able to this is basically a central point for all accounting communications and systems. So if currently you use Xero, QuickBooks, you're able to access those systems through our app as well as getting latest news updates, links from the Charity Commission. So easy access to calculators, we've also got a receipt document scanner in there, so you can actually scan receipts and hold those details within the app. And also we've got a function to record income and expenditure, which feeds directly into us. So if you are an existing client of ours already and you don't use an accounting system, we're able to see your income and expenditure straight away without you filling in any other spreadsheets. It's just a direct link into us. And also, as part of our project, we actually need to feed back to the National Lottery work that we've been doing. So as part of the session today, we've actually got an evaluation questionnaire, which is actually on our app. So what we'd like everyone to do, if they're happy to, is to actually download the app while they're on the end of this training, and actually then you can complete the evaluation questionnaire through the app, and then you'll have all those facilities available to you. If it's something that you're not comfortable, you don't want to download the app straight away, I will be sending out a link to the evaluation questionnaire in our slides and additional feedback that we're sending out on email after the session. So you will be able to complete that at that point. But as a starting point, with the information that you need is on screen now. So if you use an Apple phone, you just need to go to the App Store and search for My Accountants. You'll then be asked to register an email address and a password, and enter the unique access code, which is on the bottom of the screen, which is CCAS. Or you can use the QR code, which is on the screen now. If you've got a camera to hand on your phone, you can snap that and it will take you straight away to the App Store. Abby, is there anything that you wanted to add to that one?
I think it's really just to give a bit of explanation about how we're going to use this. For a long time, we've wanted to get an easy way of contacting people within Cornwall. So we would like to share it with charity organisations within Cornwall, and then we can get updates about requirements, Charity Commission requirements, any new things going on in the charity world, and we can actually get it out to people very quickly. Elise can't see the access code, so I'll just put it in the chat for you. And it's something that we can develop as we move forward. So we're very much at the beginning stages of it now. We intend to have client portals in there so that our clients can upload their documents directly through the app if they want to. And if there is anything specific that our clients would like, we will take that on board and try and incorporate it into it. But I think with everyone nowadays using their mobile phones so much for work purposes, I think we wanted to be at the forefront of that and being able to keep in touch with people. And it also means that you can get in touch with us that way as well.
Yeah, but it's definitely a work in progress at the moment. So we would really appreciate any feedback as well from when you're downloading it. Anything that you're coming across, if there's something that doesn't look quite odd, or you want just clarification on what that can do or what that means, then please get in contact.
Actually, one of the things we might consider putting into our training would be the upload of documents directly into ClearBooks, QuickBooks and Xero, which can be done through using the app. And for those people who have tried it, maybe you could give us a comment as to how you find the upload of documents to your accounting system. For us, obviously, it's great because as soon as we look into your accounting system, we can get a copy of all the documentation so that we don't have to go and collect files from you.
Chris has got it.
Yay!
Doesn't take very long.
Excellent. No, it's good. Yeah.
You have to, if you can't see the code thing, you can reduce your screen at the top by zoom ratio. If you go to the top where it says view options, you can do zoom ratio fit to window, and you can see it. Because I couldn't see it on mine, but I did that and I could see it then.
We can't access the app via a computer, I'm afraid. It's you can access it via an iPad or the phone. And Colin's asked why it needs to access your physical activity, and that is for recording mileage.
It doesn't
so
need to, you can set that off.
So Sam, I believe we're going to send the link to the questionnaire out separately as well, aren't we?
Yeah.
Excellent, Graham. I can see it. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So if you're not comfortable with the app, we will be sending that separately. But if we could have your feedback, it would be very much appreciated, because we will collate that for the lottery so that they can see what we're doing. And we're a bit earlier than anticipated. Oh, I like all these screens showing that out. Has anybody got any final questions for us?
If anybody thinks of something that they later on, do please, feel free to email it to Debbie and Sam, and they'll forward it to me, and I'll answer it outside of this if you'd like me to.
Emma's just come up in terms of training, including other grants and not just trusts, Helen. Can we incorporate that in future ones?
I will have a look. I'm writing it down. Do you mean grants from other funding organisations than trusts? So, for example, the Arles Silly Investment Fund. Do you mean things like that? And EU funding, and is that what you mean?
Yeah, I was meaning other funding in terms of like Heritage Lottery Fund, or even
consider having an extra session on things like crowdfunding and those type of alternative fundraising methods. Would people be interested in that? Okay, we'll consider doing that, because I think we can actually bring people in from people like Unlimited and Crowdfunder. So we will try and organise that for you. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think we're all done. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We feel it's been very, very well attended, and we hope that you find it useful, and certainly we'll be looking at dates to put on some future training to complete the whole run that that Helen has mentioned.
Great.
And thank you very much, Helen, for your presentation.
You're very welcome. Thank you for bearing with my nerves. It was nice to meet everybody.
Big thank you to Sam, who's done all of the admin and getting things organised, particularly with polls and technology and all the rest of it. So thanks for that,
Great.
Sam.
Thank you.
It's very nice for me. I just have to turn up and talk.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'll see you later on, Sam.
Yes. See you in a bit.
I just emailed them to check everything was still on and it's fine.
Yeah.
So and they said they could only do an hour, but that's fine, isn't it?
Yeah. Sally did say she's available from 2, so if you wanted to get there closer to 2, that's fine with me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go with that then.
Yep. Great.
Okay. See you in a bit.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for your involvement.
Cheers.
Bye.
How's your nerves then, Helen?
I find it much easier the Q&A kind of bit at the end, kind of, you know, interacting a little bit more, because there's always that thought in the back of your mind, right? I've said I'm going to cover this and I'm talking about this area, but is this what people want? Whereas with the question and answer, it's much shorter snippets, and if it's not, you move on to the next thing. It's the technology side that stresses me out, because